Welcome to Timeless Chronicles. Researchers discovered the only first-person account of the Great Pyramid's construction. A team of Egyptian and French scholars discovered a papyrus diary written by an official named Menkaure. What makes this discovery so compelling is that his diary is the world's sole first-person description of how the Great Pyramid was built. Archaeologists found Menkaure's papyrus in the Red Sea port of Wadi al-Jarf. The pyramid's limestone was transported via a system of canals. In Menkaure's diary, he recounts how limestone quarried in Tura, about 12 miles south of Cairo, was transported by boat across the Nile River to Giza, through specially built canals built by his team. One such vessel was unearthed at the bottom of the pyramids. After traversing the river, the stone blocks were then deposited near the building site by workers using ropes. The pyramid's stone blocks are massively heavy. Around 2550 BC, Pharaoh Khufu started construction on the Great Pyramid at Giza. It is made up of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block is absolutely massive and weighs between 2.5 to 15 tons. When the Great Pyramid was built, it was reportedly 481 feet tall. Over time, the structure sunk a little into the desert and is now 455 feet tall. Egyptians traveled far to mine copper for the tools to cut the stones for the pyramids. The individuals who built the pyramids required strong tools to cut the stone for the pyramids. Workers mined copper across the Red Sea and transported it to the port of Wadi al-Jarf before it reached Giza. Pharaoh Khufu, also known as King Cheops, built the harbor about 111 miles from Suez, which is hundreds of miles from Giza. Some historians believe the pyramid required 100,000 workers. It's impossible to agree upon an exact count of just how many people contributed to the building of the pyramids, but that doesn't mean there aren't educated hypotheses currently being postulated. According to Greek historian Herodotus, the pyramids were built by 100,000 workers, although many of today's Egyptologists think the number is more likely between 20,000 and 30,000. Dutch physicists believe the ancient Egyptians used wet sand to drag the blocks across the desert. In 2014, researchers from the University of Amsterdam and the Foundation for Fundamental Research on Matter conducted an experiment. They transported heavy stone on a sledge across the sand. They proved it was significantly easier to move the sledge on damp sand versus dry sand. In fact, the action required just half the force. The reason? Wet sand sticks to itself and is more solid than dry sand. Plus, damp sand doesn't bunch up in front of a sledge while it's moving. Another theory: the stones were turned into 12-sided polygons and rolled to the site. Dr. Joseph West of Indiana State University developed his own theory about how the stone blocks were moved to the pyramid's construction site. In 2014, he suggested that builders might have secured wooden beams to a stone block, turning it into a dodecagon, a 12-sided object, which would have enabled workers to more easily move them as opposed to dragging them. He wrote, "No one could find any copper chisels around the Great Pyramid build site." Over the years, many have wondered how so many of the blocks used in the pyramids were nearly identical in size and weight. People were also puzzled because no one has found a single copper chisel, presumably used to carve the stones, on the grounds of the Giza Plateau. In the mid-80s, Joseph Davidovits, director of the Geopolymer Institute in St. Quentin, France, theorized that the blocks used to make the pyramids were actually a composite of several materials: limestone, clay, and lime, mixed in water. He completely destabilized the idea that copper was the main component. Perhaps the pyramids were built inside out. When it comes to placing the large stone blocks in place on the pyramids, many believe the ancient Egyptians used large ramps. Thousands of people would have been required to set 2 million blocks to make the structures. In 2013, engineer Peter James, whose company spent nearly 2 decades restoring the pyramids, disputed that claim. He called it impossible, because the ramps would have had to be about 1/4 mile long. Otherwise, they would be too steep to move the limestone and granite materials. Instead, James theorized that the workers crafted the inner core of the pyramid with smaller blocks using a series of zigzagging ramps. Want more ancient Egypt? One of the oldest and most mythologized cultures in human history, ancient Egypt has attracted the curious and the adventurous for millennia.